Um, so today we're talking about how to cope with loss, or how to overcome the grief of a loss. Every person experiences loss. For Barbara, it was the loss of her son. Now, losing a child has been described as some of the worst pain and some of the most difficult grief to be able to overcome. It can rip apart families, and it definitely challenged Barbara's family. When she came home to find out that her teenage son died from fentanyl poisoning, she was unsure of how she should respond and how she should handle this moment. And as it would have it, she's actually a counselor. So she had a full schedule ahead of her for the next couple of days. In her case, she decided not to cancel the appointments on her schedule, to finish out the obligations that were there. And then she booked a retreat at a cabin where she could go into the wilderness, away from everyone, and just grieve the incredible loss that she had experienced. Today, I'm going to give you tools that you can use to be able to cope with the grief, to be able to overcome the pain of a profound loss. And loss can look 1,000 different ways in your life. It could be the loss of a child like Barbara. You could lose your husband or wife to a divorce or to death. Your girlfriend or boyfriend that you cherish so much, who could have left you. Or maybe you've had to part from them because you recognize that the relationship was toxic. People have to experience the loss of a job, the loss of their belongings, their house, their car. People have lost cherished positions, privileges. So whether it's an object or a person, how can we overcome this loss? How can we overcome this grief? Because it's really an inevitability of life, right? But the reality is, whatever loss you experience, whatever it is that has disappeared out of your life, whatever it is that you once had, but you're suddenly finding yourself not having anymore, a loss is always a simplification. I want you to use that as a tool and just write down in your notes, loss equals simplification. It's a principle of life that the more you have, the more complication you have, right? If you have more money, then it will create more to manage. If you have more people in your life, then you have more people and personalities to manage, more preferences to manage. Whenever you have more, it doesn't simplify your life. It actually complicates your life. And that's not always a bad thing. In fact, many of us are like, sign me up for that complication, because I want to have as much in my life as possible. I want to live a life of abundance. And that's certainly okay. We get to make personal choices. Some people actually choose to live with less in their life because that allows their life to stay simple. Simple meaning uncomplicated, without distraction, focused. So professional athletes, for instance, will often live very simply, especially in the on season of their sport, so that they can focus on what they're doing, on their sport of choice. So they're not going to be a professional swimmer and then say, you know, during the swim season, I'd really love to do recreational pickup basketball. And I've always wanted to take up knitting, and I like to do some traveling. They're not going to do all of that while they're in their training season, because they're keeping their life simple. When we lose things, even though we didn't give those things up by choice many times, it is a simplification in our life. And having the right mindset or beliefs around what is happening to us allows us to be able to cope better. So I am giving you this tool, loss equals simplification, because I want this to be one of the first things that comes into your mind when you experience a profound loss. Whether this is a loss of a person, if it is the loss of a job, a position, or material goods. Your life has now become simplified. By virtue of having less, there is simply less that you can do. By virtue of there being less that you can do, it becomes easier to identify what you should do. A loss equals a simplification. This is important because we tend to focus on all of the negative that this loss brings about. And that's all too easy when we've literally lost someone who was the most important person in our life. But if we want to be able to come out on the other end of this and be whole and be complete, if we want to be able to heal and remain healed in our processing of this grief, we must keep in mind the simple concept that the loss has now led to a simplification in our life, which means that because we have less, there's really less options, and with less options, it is easier to choose. It now becomes simpler for us to see what we should do. Most people get their purpose from their loss, from their grief, from their trauma. Because what you've been through in your life now sort of especially qualifies you to be able to help others through that exact same thing. We have the ability to use our imaginations and create the ideal reaction to what we are experiencing. It is important for us to tap into that space, that personal power, to be into the space of creativity, even through a profound loss, to be able to observe what is happening to us in real time and start to create what we think we should do or could become as a result of what is happening right now, to be able to identify, to search for a potential purpose that we could mount at that very moment as we are experiencing the profound loss. One expert on grief said, you don't get over it, but you take it with you as a part of your journey in life. So it's not about getting over the loss. It's about taking the loss with you as a part of your story. Unfortunately, we don't get to escape the fact that we had that loss. But it's important now that we don't center our entire life around the loss. But instead, we have to learn how to center the loss around our life. Now, what does that mean? We get the first part, like we understand not centering our life around the loss means that we don't now make this loss the only thing in our life, the only definitive, defining aspect of who we are and what we are, and we make our entire life about, well, you have to just care about this, think about this 24 hours. It's important we don't do that. Even if the person was very important to us, our wife, our child that we lost, it's important that we keep it in perspective, and instead of centering the life around the loss, we put the loss centered around the life, meaning that we're going to put it like if we were a planet and we had things that were orbiting our life, we're going to take this loss and we're going to put it in an orbit around our planet. This is a way of taking the loss with you on your journey. It's not about running away from it or leaving it behind. When we get into the idea of trying to run away from the pain, then we can slip into abusing drugs or alcohol or distractions that are unhealthy. But it's about taking this loss with us and changing our perspective on it so that we can see how we can use what was once a stumbling block and put it somewhere where it can be a stepping stone. And to do that, it's all our mindset, how we're analyzing the loss. We have to actually find a benefit to this terrible tragedy, which is not always easy at first, but it is possible because you can remain in a state of wisdom and creativity through your grief. Find the benefit. Sometimes we have to make a benefit for the loss, right? Because it's not readily apparent. And some losses are so profound, so deep, so unacceptable that we have to find a way to benefit or to make it beneficial, if not just to ourselves, to someone else. But this is the mind space that we need to get into in order to be able to properly overcome and to grieve this loss in a way that is healthy and healed. Here's an example of finding the benefit. One thing that could come out of the worst tragedies in our life, out of the worst traumas, the worst violations that we could experience, is that it gives us relatability. Because if other people are going through it, why not us? We're always saying, why me? But if other people are going through it, why not me too? What you experience gives you relatability. What has happened to you allows you to relate to other people who it has happened to as well, which puts you in a better position to help them than I am. Because if it has never happened to me, people don't want to hear me talk about it. They rather hear you talk about what happened because it's actually happened to you. It gives you relatability. It also gives you credibility. This is where you put it in orbit around your life. This becomes a credential for you. Oh, I've been through some things, honey. And let me explain how. Because it is a credential for you that you've experienced that you've lived through that you've survived that hell, that tragedy. Because there are other people who are going through it and they are wondering, are they alone? Is there anyone else who can relate to them? And you can. If our mindset is wrong, we could miss the opportunity to be a profound source of comfort and help to other people who are experiencing these things. We can turn this loss into something greater than ourselves. And isn't that just how your son would have wanted it? Or your daughter, or your wife, or whoever it was that you lost, wouldn't they want to know that you turned it into something better, something bigger, rather than became something worse, something smaller as a result of your loss? As we mentioned, a loss is a simplification. It now makes it easy for us to identify what we should do, what our purpose could be now, what we could take on and work on, because now we simply have less. There are simply less people that we can pour ourselves into. There are simply less opportunities or places we could work or things that we can do. Whatever you lost has now created a simplification. That is one of the benefits. Find the benefit. Create the benefit. We should have a mindset, I'm going to make something amazing come out of this. Wasn't that the mindset that Joseph had? In that Bible story where his brothers were jealous of him because he was talking about his dreams where everybody was going to bow down to him. So they decided, we're going to teach this guy a lesson. In fact, they wanted to kill him, but one of the brothers was like, maybe we could bring it a step down from killing him. And they ended up throwing him in a pit and then selling him off into slavery. They sold their brother as a slave. Now imagine Joseph in this moment, this young man thinking, what in the world? This is unfair. My brothers just took me, sold me off as a slave. Am I nothing? What a violation. What an invalidation of a human being. My own family, my own flesh and blood has betrayed me. He could have reflected on his incredible loss because he was very close to his father. But Joseph had a mindset that he would make something amazing come out of whatever situation he was in. And so he found himself always rising to the top and becoming great in every situation. When he was in jail at one point, he rose to the top. When he had a job, he rose to the top. He was always getting raises and promotions. What eventually happened, this man became so well known for his gifts, he got the attention of the king. And long story short, he ended up getting put into a position that made him the second highest in the entire world. He knew how to get through his loss by focusing on what he could do. He made something amazing come out of that tragedy. So when famine struck, and the people from the outskirts had to come into the capital in order to get food, they had to come to Joseph. And guess who was there bowing down before him, just like he once dreamed? His own flesh and blood, his brothers. But none of that could have come to fruition if Joseph would have taken an unhealed mindset, an unhealthy mindset, and said, well, forget it then. If I've lost this, then I give up on everything. Doesn't that create a powerful lesson for our life and how we can approach these different situations, to be able to look at a loss, find a benefit, where possible, use it as an impetus, a spark, a catalyst, to be able to actually burn it as fuel in our lives? Isn't that the natural order of the universe? When we look at planet Earth and the ecology, how the leaves that turn orange and brown and fall from the trees fall down and become fertilizer when they decompose for the exact same tree that they came from. And then the tree uses it as energy and produces beautiful fruitage and green leaves again. The earth is made very efficient that way, to the point where there really is no loss. Anything on earth that you can think of, it just gets transferred. It can change, but it basically never gets lost. I wanted to check in on this thought, so I texted my friend who's a scientist. And I said to her, isn't it accurate that in ecology, everything just kind of transfers into something else, but nothing is ever actually lost? And she said, yes, basically. And she said, well, maybe except heat energy. Scientists have observed that heat energy gets created and sometimes it just dissipates into the atmosphere, and we don't always know how to harness that energy. It seems to get wasted. I thought about it. I texted her back and I said, I feel like that's a very primitive way to look at the dissipation of heat energy. Because while we're sitting here saying it's being wasted because we don't know how to harness it or where it goes exactly, the birds are flying in the sky and they're saving energy by not having to flap their wings because they're actually able to glide on heat currents. And then she texted back, yeah, I was going to put in a caveat like that. Then she wrote, heat is weird, which is a very scientist thing to write. You know that if I were to follow up and say, what do you mean heat is weird? She's got years of research on what's so weird about heat energy. But I took it into a spiritual direction and I said, yeah, heat is like one of the most loving of energy types. It's like love. And I was thinking in my head about how you're in the arms of your mother or of a loved one and you feel the heat of their body. It's like very closely related to love. Heat. It's so loving that we have heat on earth. It's the proper balance of heat that allows us to be able to live here on planet Earth. And then she wrote back some snarky comment about she didn't know I could be that sweet. But when we think about that, I started to take my research a step further. And I was correct in my hypothesis about heat being ever present like love, because as it turns out, all reactions, all chemical reactions either produce heat or use heat. It's always a part of the equation, just like love. Because when you experience a profound loss and you're feeling all of that grief, that's love. Grief is love. You cannot feel grief for something you do not love. Use this as a tool for your notes. Write down grief equals love. You have to understand that the reason why you feel moved to grieve is because you are looking to express your love. I had one person online write to me, I will never find what is acceptable about the loss of my child. And I wrote back, you are absolutely right to do so. That is your choice. The reason why we feel like we would not even want to find what is acceptable about what has happened to us is because our grief is an expression of our love. And so we don't want to let go of it sometimes. We don't want to let go of the pain. We don't want to let go of the sadness because we feel like if we do that, it's almost a betrayal to the person whom we've lost, a betrayal to our value system. And so if you choose to continue to grieve for as long as you want to grieve, that is your choice. You can feel the pain, but just understand what's really happening is you're expressing love. Understanding this will help you to be able to ask the right questions. Because when you experience a loss, the right question is, what's the best expression of my love in this certain circumstance? Because I don't want to waste the energy. What can happen with imbalanced grief, if we just cry and wallow in the grief, it becomes sort of like a waste of energy, like having a light on in a room where we're not using it. Because it doesn't lead to any practical benefit for ourselves or anyone else. Again, it's proper to grieve, but we want to be careful not to become imbalanced and lose the other side of it, which is to find what we can do with this feeling, with this love that we have. The question to ask when we experience a loss is, what is the best expression of this love? Because it's the love that leads to the pain. You cannot grieve without love. Your grief is an expression of your love, of your values, of who you are. Gratefully, Barbara, when she lost her son, and after she took that time to grieve, she was able to ask herself that question. What is the best expression of this love? What can I do with this energy? And in her case, since she was already a counselor, she just made a slight change to focus on grief counseling. And she became flooded with other mothers who had lost their children. And then she set up a foundation that would actually fight the selling of fentanyl and these things that are causing the deaths, the premature deaths of these young people. By doing so, she's actually saving lives. And she's helping people to overcome their grief. And she's the best one for it because she's been through it. Her grief gives her credibility. It gives her relatability. She feels the pain, but the pain is best used as an energy, as a grieving, loving energy to propel her forward to fight the deaths of other young people. Her grief is best used in service, not just because it helps others, but because it helps her too. And when you think about it, if her son were to come back and see what it was she was doing, he would be proud. As opposed to if she had not asked the question, what is the best way I can use this love? And instead wallowed in the pain and in the grief and became bitter, so that it would lead to the destruction of her marriage, and it would lead to her neglecting her other children, and it would lead to her neglecting her career, and thus she would lose all of those other valuable things that she had in her life because she was focusing her mind on what she did not have. So what she did not have actually would expand. And then if her son were to see that, if her loved one were to come back and say, well, Mom, what have you been doing? How have you been doing? And to find out that she's lost everything and the marriage with his father is over and his siblings are estranged and her career is gone, he's not going to say, wow, I'm so grateful to know you loved me so much. And that's how we know that's not a balanced way of utilizing our grief. We have to avoid staring into the endless abyss, or the void, as I call it, of what we do not have. It is an endless, infinite void, and all of us are floating on an island in a void that is endless of things we do not have. And when we lose something into that void, into that abyss, the worst thing we can do is focus on that. And so I invite you, if you're in a safe place right now, to do this meditation with me and just close your eyes for a moment. And picture yourself floating through empty space on an island. You're floating through space on an island. Your island has some trees and it has some plants, and there's enough space for you to build a house there and to cultivate the land and to live on this island. And then the outside, all around you, is this endless space, this endless void of things. And you start to notice that slowly that void is eroding at your island. Would you build your house right on the edge of this island? What would happen if you built your house there? The reason so many build their house on the edge of this island is because they want to keep looking over the edge into the abyss of what they do not have. They want to keep focusing on their loss. Wouldn't it be wiser now to build your house in the middle of the island and to focus on what you do have? I want you to picture yourself doing that now. Picture yourself building a nice house in the middle of the island, utilizing the wood and the materials that are around. And then you're cultivating the ground, and then you realize you got coconuts and you got trees, and trees prevent erosion. So you can start planting trees on your island, and that starts to slow the erosion of your island. Now, isn't this so much better? Now, keep imagining yourself on this island now that's strong and healthy with these trees surrounding it, keeping it from eroding, with your beautiful house on it and all of your plants and your crops plentiful with food. And now imagine your loved one floating by, that boyfriend or girlfriend that left you, that husband or wife that divorced you, and them seeing you on that island, plentiful, strong, they're attracted now, right? They would want to come and join you on that island if they could. Now open your eyes. This illustrates the difference between focusing on the void and focusing on what you do have. As I was talking to my friend about this just the other day, and she said, you're absolutely right. Because in the situation, in my situation where I actually left the man that I am now married to, I left him. And if he would have focused on everything he did not have and wallow in the pain and the depression and become sad and emaciated and lose his job and lose his health, I would not have come back. But it was because he had the mental fortitude, the maturity to focus on how he could work on himself, develop himself, and improve on himself. He fixed all of the things that I had an issue with. And now he's got me back. And by my telling of this story, they're living happily ever after. I'm sure they wouldn't say it like that. But use this as a tool. Recognize that you cannot continue to focus on the endless abyss of what you do not have. You maybe heard of the 5 stages of grief, which I believe are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I want you to move past all of those stages. I want you to bypass those stages. Because those stages don't represent a healed way of grieving. You might say, but it's natural. I mean, you just want us to bypass the natural reaction to a loss, to grief? Yes, it's natural because it's emotional, it's automatic. Yes, when we're in our emotional mind, we go directly into denial, but now we're denying reality. That's not healed or healthy. We go directly into anger, but sometimes if it's something we can't control, the anger is really not the proper emotion. The bargaining, but again, if we can't control reality, the bargaining may not be the proper move. Depression, that's not healthy. The only healthy stage is the acceptance stage. And it's not good for it to take so long for us to get there. What's superior is for us to actually start with the acceptance and move directly into optimization, which is what happens when we're self-actualized, when we're balanced in our thinking. Optimization is asking, how can I make sure I optimize this love energy that I'm feeling? How can I make sure I am utilizing this love, that I am grieving in a way that is productive? How can I turn this into something amazing? That is the superior way to grieve. I hope these tips are helpful to you. When you're in that space of creativity, of optimization, where you're visualizing what is the best way you can help someone, then that really allows you to be able to move through and take the loss with you as a part of your story. And please understand, I'm in the human condition like you. I've experienced my losses as well. I've lost my grandparents, whom I was close to, and my big sister by way of abortion, and my biological father was absent, and my best friend committed suicide at 22, and I lost my wife in divorce and a girlfriend by breakup, and my assistant died in a car accident. I lost privileges of service as the equivalent of a deacon, and once as the equivalent of a pastor. But we are all experiencing losses. You're going through losses as well. And in all of these, I found that the best tool was optimization, to ask myself, what is the best way I could use this love? Because the reason I'm grieving these things, the reason I'm grieving these losses, is because I loved these things or these people. And so in some cases, I felt it appropriate to cry. In others, I found it unnecessary. The question was, how can I best utilize this love, this grief? And what I noticed is that sometimes I needed to grieve with the people who were grieving so that I could be a support to them. I needed to cry with them. And yes, that allowed me to grieve as well, but I was thinking in terms of how I could optimize to be whatever I needed to be so that I could support and assist other people who were going through that. At other times, I needed to make some changes. I needed to rebuild, to start fresh, because now things were simplified and I had lost what I once had. And I needed to figure out how I would not only regain, but build back in a stronger way. And I'm grateful for those losses. I'm grateful because when I focus, I realize that I never was deserving of having any of those things anyhow. Many of us go into an unhealed mindset of, hey, this is not fair that I lost these things. But a healed person recognizes it was never fair that you had them in the first place. And if you were given the opportunity, and I said that I could make it so that in your life you never had that thing in the first place. And that way we can spare you of all the pain of loss. Would you like it so that you were never married to the man of your dreams that you ended up losing? Would you like it so that you never had that wonderful child that ended up dying? Would you prefer it so that you never had that position in that company that you lost, or that position in your church or in your community that you lost? Would you prefer that? And in most cases, you say no. The reality is that you would do it again. You would prefer to have it again. Because you realize when faced with the prospect of having to live your life having never loved, it's better to have loved. Even with the loss. Because those losses are a part of your story. They're a part of who you are. The things that you had are made you who you are today. You can't be who you are right now if you didn't ever experience those things, if you never had those things. So let's optimize and focus on what we can do with all of this love that we're feeling. In fact, right now, I want you to take a moment and just meditate with me and identify in your mind 3 things that you're grateful for. Do that right now. Just identify 3 things that you're grateful for. Tiny things. They don't have to be huge. How do you feel Our goal is to be constantly in a state of gratitude, creativity, personal power. That gives us the tools we need to endure any loss. Hopefully you find these tools to be helpful to you. Obviously, we could go on about subjects like this for a long time, but we have to respect our time here today, and it's come to an end. All of us who are on this call, we want to invite you to be with us again on Wednesday, where we discuss complex trauma. And I'll give another talk that day. But I have a healing course online that is designed to give you what would be the equivalence of months of therapy with me. And it puts it all right there, lays it all out for you in video form for you to go through at your own pace. And I give you the tools and the gems to be able to change your mindset, to be able to heal. So I recommend you take a look at that course. Feel free to set up a session with Marissa or myself via our website. And thank you all for your support. I love you so much.